So, um, so good afternoon, everybody. I am talking into the void as this is a webinar. So if you have questions, please chime in. I appreciate knowing that people are awake. So I've been asked today to talk about spotted lanternfly, which is fairly new on the scene, but hopefully you'll find some interesting information on it. So just to start off with, as an entomologist, as a bug person, I like to talk about the bugs. And spotted lanternfly is a member of a family called the Fulguroideae, which is a great name. But they're plant hoppers, and they're related to things like aphids, cicadas, and stink bugs. So they have piercing, sucking mouth parts. They stick into the plant and suck up the juices from the plant. And we just didn't, in this part of the world, in northeastern Connecticut or northeastern US, we don't have any members of this family. There is a native plant fulguroid down in the southeast, and it's this little red guy here. But a lot of the tropical species are just kind of fantastic. They've got, a lot of them have this extension of their cuticle on their head, so they have this beautiful little forehead ornament, and they're called lanternflies because there was a belief that this head was actually a little light, which seems silly, but lanternflies do exist. I mean, lightning bugs do exist, so not as silly as maybe it could be. Okay. So this particular fulguroid or lanternfly is not coming from down south. It's coming from far eastern Asia, sort of up in the northern part of China into southern Russia, and it's actually been invaded into other areas of Asia before it got to here, and in particular the Korean Peninsula. And you can see it's a very separate place here. They were invaded in 2004, and so we had a fair amount of information about them before they even got here, because the Korean scientific and agricultural community had been dealing with this pest for a while already. So just to quick, this is what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. Again, as an entomologist, I don't think any of these look very similar, but they do. They're all a similar size and have a sort of overall shape that looks similar. So this is the lanternfly with its wings closed, and here it is with its wings open. So it does look quite a bit like a moth when it is sitting with its wings open. But it is not any of these things. And I think they're distinctive enough. We haven't had, and big enough, people haven't had a real problem identifying them. So let's talk about its life cycle. I'm going to do a lot of sort of basic biology with you guys and talk about, so that you have an understanding of what this insect does. If we start here with the eggs, it is currently winter, and any of the spotted lanternflies that are out there at this point are at this point in their life cycle. And the eggs themselves are these little rectangles, and almost all members of this group have very neat little rows of eggs. They're very cute, but they're underneath a layer of protective covering over the egg mass, which helps to keep the eggs from desiccating and protect them from predation by things like ants. The first ones, when they hatch out, they look, without the wings, a lot like the adults would look if the adults didn't have wings, but they're very small and they look a lot like deer ticks when they first hatch. But then they get bigger and bigger, keeping with the black and white polka dot color scheme. And then they become red when they get to be the fourth instar. And then finally, the adults are arriving in late July. And these things have an annual life cycle, so they're going through this one generation a year. It takes them all summer through to October to be laying eggs. So again, with that life cycle timeline, November through April, May, the egg masses are overwintering. In May, the nymphs are emerging. June, July, nymphs are developing, potential early adults. August, adults begin a feeding. In September, the adults are feeding, dispersing, mating. And then in October, until the first hard frost, so about 28 degrees Fahrenheit, they will be laying eggs. So, we were out collecting data until mid-November this year because the frost didn't really come until then. They're quite cold hardy. Here's just some more pictures of the nymphs. So you can, sometimes you'll see the various stages on a plant together. Some of them are going a little faster than the others. And then here's adults, and the adults could start as early as July, mostly in August, or they, change to the adult stage. And the adults really like Tree of Heaven as a host for feeding. But we'll be talking a little bit more about that. And they're not strong flyers, but they can fly. And they're good jumpers. And their egg masses, and this picture here, I want to show you. Here's the little rows of eggs underneath this waxy kind of looking cover. And so it's a little bit like spongy moth, used to be called gypsy moth, but spongy moth egg mass, but it's very well camouflaged, and it really just looks like a smear of dirt. So that can be very easy to miss if you're not looking for it. So this adult biology, you have feeding, they feed, and you have this dispersal, and then they get together and they mate. And in September, where they are is on Tree of Heaven, unless they're on a grapevine. So that's a really great place to target a whole lot of them at once. And this is a picture of a female who lost her wings to something like a bird or some other situation that was going on there. But you can really see that fat belly. And that is there because she is building up a lot of fat so that she can lay, and the eggs, so that she can lay her brood when she's ready to do it. And there's just some pictures of what they do. So over here we have lots of spotted lanternfly adults all over this tree. This is not the bark, this is the spotted lanternflies. Here you can see some of the side effects of their feeding. So how many of you, I don't know if there's any way for you to show me, but how many of you have experienced spotted lanternfly? Well, I guess.
So yeah, Claire, they're unable to, they don't have their audio on, but I have the Q&A going, so it's live. So
Okay.
any questions that you want to ask them can absolutely be, they can chime in.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, any of you have dealt with them, you know that one of their major attributes, besides the big size and a lot of them, is that they are more or less constantly pooping out honeydew. And honeydew is just like the nicest name for insect poop ever. But in a way, it's kind of accurate, because what's happening is that the spotted lanternflies, both the nymphs and the adults, are putting their proboscis, their stylets, into the phloem of the tree, which is the tissue that carries the sugars from the top of the tree down to the bottom of the tree. And so what they're drinking is essentially sugar water, which, as we all know, is not very nutritious. And so they have to drink a lot of it in order to get all the other nutrients that they need besides sugar. So they're excreting and getting rid of a lot of sugar water constantly, which is why you get this sticky covering over everything. It's essentially sugar water, a concentrated sap. And so that attracts stinging insects, ants and, well, wasps and bees really like that honeydew. And then the other big consequence of that is that anything that's underneath this a group of feeding SLF will get covered and sticky, and then opportunistic things like sooty mold will come along and colonize it. And this also happens with aphids and scales and a lot of other things that you might be familiar with, but because of the large numbers of SLF, and because especially with the adults how chunky they are, it is an impressively large scale of sooty mold. Okay, so we know it's from Far Eastern Asia. You know, when did it show up here? Where did it show up here? So its original foothold, so to speak, was in Berks County, Pennsylvania in late 2014 is when it was first discovered. And that initial survey there just shows you where they looked, and the red is where they found the SLF. And they're fairly certain that this guy came in as those really well camouflaged egg masses on stone, that things like countertops and stuff that had been imported from China into this site in Pennsylvania, and put out back in the stone yard with all the other stones, and that's where it emerged. And Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania and Penn State, they made a real strong attempt to keep these things limited and get rid of them. But as you all know, that did not work. This is the current distribution of spotted lanternfly in the US. There's doesn't look like 18 states, but I think it is 18 states, they said so far. You can see that a lot of these sites are very distant from each other, and that is because these guys are not flying on their own. They are being moved around like so often happens with invasive pests. Now in Connecticut, we have them. We first got them in 2020. So, and the very first find was just over the state border from New York State at the airport, the White Plains Airport. And this map is from 2023. All of these little red circles are sightings that were reported by people who saw them and entered them into the spotted lanternfly reporting portal that is at the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station website. Don't think I managed to, well, we should toot our horns a little bit. I'm from the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station, which is the first experiment station in the country. We started in 1875, so we're in our 150th year serving the citizens of Connecticut. We're located in New Haven and up in Windsor. And you should check out our website. We've got a lot of really great stuff on there, as well as the reporting. One of the great things is this reporting panel for SLF sightings. And looking at this map of sightings in Connecticut, okay, so these X's are places where people looked but didn't find it. And then the reds are where people looked and saw it, I think. No, vice versa. It doesn't make sense to me. The reds are where SLF is, the green is where it isn't. So here is the major distribution in Connecticut, as most of you who, or if any of you are from the southern coast, you know that down in Fairfield County, especially along coastal Fairfield County, it has been rampant. It is working its way east along the coast. It is also has a couple of these disjunct populations that we saw on a larger scale with the country. So up in here, an infestation was originally found at the Elephant's Trunk Flea Market in New Milford, and it has been expanding from there. And of course, this is all along the 95 corridor. So this all brings up, how are these SLF getting around to these different places? And those patterns I just pointed out are because a lot of that is human assisted. So they can fly when they're adults. They do fly, and they do sometimes fly long distances. I was in Greenwich last year, and they were watching, the hawks migrate. And you could also see SLF flying up in the air. It was pretty crazy. When they're little, they're very good hoppers. They're very good hoppers as adults too. So they are dispersing to a certain extent on their own. We don't have a great understanding of how they move through the landscape yet. I'll be talking about that in a minute. But hitchhiking really does seem to be their preferred way to get around, at least to spread very far. And they hitchhike as eggs. So these egg masses that they lay, they will lay them on just about anything. So this is this great picture from Massachusetts DNR. We've got them on vehicle wheels. We have them on out of sight areas like under deck stairs, fence posts. I think this is, camping equipment, anything you have that is in that area that has a nice smooth surface with maybe a little bit of overhang, they will lay eggs on it. And so one of the really important things to do before you're driving somewhere, especially if it's during the time period when these eggs will be hatching, or shipping something somewhere, is really checking those vehicles and making sure, or the moving pods or whatever it is you have that is going to be moved, lawn equipment, anything like that that's been outside, to make sure there's no eggs on them. And if there is, scratch it off. So hitchhiking as eggs is one of their tricks, but they also do hitchhiking as nymphs or adults. And this is a lovely picture from the New Jersey DNR, where they have, these are all the little fourth instar nymphs hanging out on a wheel. I mean, that doesn't seem like a good idea in terms of when the car starts driving, but they do jump onto the cars. And then here's just an adult sitting out. And I've heard a lot of stories of people who've been traveling up and down that I-95 corridor, especially New Jersey, that they'll just kind of be so many of these critters at rest stops, and they'll probably, that's a good place to jump on and to grab. And if we go back to this map, here, this is a site, the flea market. Lots of vendors come in from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, all over the country, and park here for the weekend or for the day to sell things and then come back. So it's a really good potential introduction site. But also rest areas. So like Milford, Connecticut, which has a large truck stop, is a real hotbed. And all along this corridor, places where there are places where trucks or cars that are moving interstate stop for a while, we see these infestations pop up. Okay, so there is currently a quarantine in the state of Connecticut. It's more of a suggestion, but really it's going to be in effect at least till the end of this year. But it's saying don't move spotted lanternfly or spotted lanternfly materials. And just a list of some of the things you should check before you move. So what are they eating and why do we care? Um, so they have a wide range of hosts. There's 180 or some odd hosts that they've been reported feeding on. So they do like trees when they're grown-ups. When they're adults, they'll go in through the bark. When they're younger, they go on more tender things, and we'll talk about that again in a minute. But as far as trees go, they do like maple, birch, willow, apple, oak, walnut. They really do like walnut, but their very much top preferred host is tree of heaven. And their second most top favorite host is grapes. And that is the agricultural impetus for the concern beyond just the nuisancey absent aspect of them. So tree of heaven, as I said, is their absolute preferred hosts. And although they can make it through a reproductive cycle, they can complete their life cycle without feeding on tree of heaven. Their fertility, the number of eggs that they can produce when they're feeding on something that isn't tree of heaven, or they don't have any point of time where they're feeding on tree of heaven, is really, really reduced. So tree of heaven is, I would still say, argue, is very important for them. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with tree of heaven. This is an invasive plant. It's been here a long time in this country. It was brought over initially because it's a pretty tree, but it is got this invasive habit, which means that it spreads easily, aggressively. It has chemicals that it puts into the soil to make it difficult for other trees to grow. So they do tend to end up in these sort of monoculture stands, and they really do like disturbed soil. So we find them on the sides of highways and along train tracks and new construction and any place where the soils where weeds grow. They're really a weed tree. But they have these long pinnately compound leaves, very long leaves, this smooth leaf edges, and down at the base they have, this is where the scent glands are. And that's one of the other outstanding characteristics of this tree, is that it's stinky, and some people have described it as rancid peanut butter. It's rancid something. I'm not sure peanut butter, maybe cashew butter, but anyway. So this has been around for a long time, and mostly people have viewed this invasive as intractable. It's been here a long time. There's not been a lot of effort put into trying to control the population, but having SLF really does give us some impetus to go after them potentially. Let's see, where am I time? Okay, so the next little bit, I just want to touch on lightly just a couple of the projects that we're working on here at the Ag Station. And we are, a small institution, Penn State, which is where, they were the OG, because that's where that showed up first. They've done an awful lot of research, and many other groups are doing research, but just 3 projects that happen to be ongoing here at the Ag Station. One is, so I'm just going to go through these. So, as I said earlier, lanternflies sort of shift their host preferences over the course of the season. So when they're little, when they're smaller, they focus on things that have a more tender skin. They're not going through that woody bark. So they love roses, cultivated roses, multiflora roses, whatever, perennials. They show up on people's cucumbers, sort of viney things. They love Oriental bittersweet. That's good too. And they're actually a lot less specific about which hosts they want. They're more broadly indiscriminate when they're little, and as they get older, they narrow in on a smaller range of hosts. And so they do tend to move through the landscape but they always like tree of heaven and they always like grapes. So understanding how they move and where they move is really important to predicting when they might become an issue, especially in an agricultural context. But it's very hard to follow insects. There, there, there are like little tags you can put on them and stuff like that. But anytime you have a small thing that's going through a complex landscape, it's hard to follow. So a lot of times what people do are called mark and recapture experiments, where you mark a bunch of the bugs and then you try to catch them again at different distances away. And so currently, my colleague, Dr. Kelsey Fisher, and I are doing an experiment where we are marking these bugs by dosing some trees with N15, which is a natural isotope of nitrogen, and just has 15 protons and is supposed to, I mean, it's heavy, is what I'm saying. So this N15 accumulates up the food chain in metabolically inert tissues. So things like wings, the exoskeleton, egg cases, they're things that don't metabolize. And so as you go up the food chain, you get more and more N15. So what we're doing is dosing those trees in the middle with the N15. So we're having them self-mark by feeding on those trees. And then we spend all fall running around and collecting spotted lanternflies off of trees in the landscape that were up to 2 kilometers away. We had 25 sites each in Westport and 25 sites in Milford, and we collected weekly. So right now, we just had a seasonal worker who's finishing up today. He spent the fall ripping the wings off of flies, the spotted lanternflies, but we'll be repairing those to do the isotopic analysis. And here's just a picture of one of our field sites. It's centered around Partridge, I spelled it wrong, Partridge wetlands in Westport, looking how they move through that really complex landscape. Another thing that we're working on is the chemical ecology of spotted lanternfly. And the chemical ecology just means like how do they interact chemically with the world. And this is work I did with my another colleague, Dr. Hanny Dweck. And he did this work in the laboratory where I actually put a needle into individual sensilla nerve cells to measure when they were firing when exposed to certain odorants. And we found some odorants, some chemicals that they were really attracted to and some that they were really repelled by. So we go out into the world. My job is to go out in the world and put them out in traps and see whether or not they're scared away. So that's something we're working on, is trying to develop repellents to protect crops for these guys. And then, of course, another important part of things is understanding what the life cycle is, and phenology GPS means the timing of it. So we've done a lot of work with that. And I'll be happy to talk more about these experiments with anybody who would be interested, but I know that's a little esoteric for what I was asked to do. So what is the impact of these guys? Well, outside of a vineyard, it's not as great as it might feel. It doesn't directly harm people. That's a good thing. It doesn't carry plant viruses, which is a better thing because it makes it really limits the damage they can do to how much sap they suck. So it's a vampire effect rather than they're not poisoning them, they're just sucking out the life juices. And so it's really best considered as a plant stressor, and it's really going to depend on how many of them there are and how long they feed. So if they're on a tree, say a maple tree for a week, a bunch of them on a tree for a week, it's not going to really impact that tree. However, with the tree of heaven, when they stay on for 1 month or 2 months or 3 months, then they can kill those trees. Um, and tree of heaven is one of the few trees that they are actually known to kill. They've been shown to kill some black walnut saplings, which they apparently really like, and they are known to kill grapevines. So that is the major economic focus. So it is tricky, the management, because it's mobile. So if you have SLF, especially the smaller guys in your yard, um, it's they're probably not going to be there very long and or inflict a lot of damage. And you can treat them sort of the same way you would treat something like aphids. You know, just wash them off. You know, that'll work for like homeowner kind of situations. But this is a little chart from the New Jersey DNR showing control options at different kinds of months. And I think this one is really important up top. And don't move any of the life stages all year round. Don't take them with you. At this time of the year, if you want, you can run around and scrape and smash eggs, look for those. And it's especially important if you're going to be moving. While they're active during the summer, you can use tree traps. And that probably is going to be more effective as a detection tool rather than a elimination tool, especially if there's a lot of SLF in the area. There are many insecticides that can be used for this, ranging from fairly safe options like the Safer Soap up through 7, etc. So they have here, they've got it broken down into contact insecticides, and I am not an insecticide person, so I'm not going to talk about particular materials, but a contact insecticide is one that you spray on the insect you're trying to kill, and it touches them, it contacts them directly, and they die. That's a contact insecticide. So you can use those if the situation is overwhelming, if you have way too many of them and they're stressing a plant, you can use something like that. Or these two other chemicals here are both what we call systemic chemicals. These are both neonicotinoids, which work very well for spotted lanternfly, although for obvious reasons, not our fave. But those can be used during the year. Now, but the problem is you don't know whether or not these guys are going to show up in your particular landscape. And it's unlikely. So trying to do the insecticides with the systemics, you have to get them there in advance. And you don't know whether or not the SLF will be there. So it makes the systemic insecticides less attractive as an option, I think. Although they do work very well, but you don't want to willy-nilly treat a bunch of things when there isn't going to be a need. Now that changes, the equation changes when you have agricultural situations going on, potentially. And speaking of agricultural systems, grapes are the preferred hosts for adult stages of SLF, and for all the different stages. And if you have a lot on them, they suck that sap out. They decrease the starch storage, and that can increase the winter kill of vines, and of course, and reduce yield. And vines, of course, are a many-year investment. So killing those vines is very costly for the growers, but it also, in the shorter term, might change the sugar contents of grapes. And if you're trying to make wine, the sugar content of grapes is something that's critical. And the picture here is just down below. That map is the Connecticut Wine Trail. And if you weren't familiar with Connecticut vineyards, I've been to quite a number of them over the past couple years, and I've been there in my capacity as a state employee, so I can't really vouch for the wines, but I can vouch for the fact that they have uh, most of the vineyards I've been to have been absolutely beautiful, and they have cute little restaurants you can eat at. They don't want SLF also because if you have your cute little restaurant covered in SLF poop, it's not so good. So both great, great vineyards, these SLF have a real chance of impacting. So what I have here, this could apply to a lot of situations. This is sort of aimed at a vineyard, but you could also use it in any particular um, area that you're trying to protect. And the first thing is getting rid of this tree of heaven. As I said before, tree of heaven is their preferred host. They do much better when they have tree of heaven. They're much more fecund. They have more babies. You know, they're really the fave thing. And as I said, they're difficult to control because they're invasive. They have clonal growth. So you cut the head off and whoop, up comes a bunch of them like a hydra. They're smelly. Um, by the way, they're not staghorn sumac, which looks really similar, but those have serrated leaves and a large fruit cluster, and they don't smell. So the folks at Penn State and actually have a bunch of different strategies that they've tried working on trying to kill tree of heaven. And one of the really effective ones, it's not an organic method at all, is using this systemic herbicide. And the idea is that if you just cut the tree, it will resprout, and then all of its little roots will also resprout trees. So you end up with a grove instead of a single tree. And so the idea is to use the systemic insecticide or herbicide, excuse me, and use the tree's own circulation. So it's like using a systemic insecticide, but instead it's an herbicide. And what you're doing is it's called hack and squirt. So you're hacking little cuts into the sides of the trees. Don't go all the way around. You don't want to girdle the tree, but you want to do it in late July through the early fall when the tree is actively transporting sugars from its canopy down into its roots for winter storage. And then the idea is hopefully that will kill a lot of the roots of the tree so that it won't regrow when you cut it. And there is more info at Penn State. And then I also just wanted to share, I was on a meeting just a little bit ago, the spotted lanternfly technical meeting with a bunch of representatives from all the different states where spotted lanternfly is. And I hadn't known about these efforts, but this is very exciting. There's two potential biological control methods that are agents that are being tested and worked on for practicality and how we can do it. One is a wilt that kills only tree of heaven, and that's been around for a while, and it's used in Europe. So that's one thing that we can try that might be coming down the pike that we can help to, if not eliminate, reduce tree of heaven, because it is all over the place now. Believe me, I'm looking for it, so I see it everywhere. And then the other is a little weevil that also feeds on tree of heaven, only tree of heaven. So it's possible that we're going to have some biocontrol coming along down the pike before too many years to get tree of heaven. And if we're going to, that will really, really, really reduce the ability of spotted lanternfly to be an issue. So, so again, step 2, edge monitoring. And this also applies to sort of any place you see them. SLF don't seem to really go that far into the forest. I'm hearing some anecdotal reports of them being in, but they do like to hang out mostly around the edges of clearings. So you see them in those areas, and if you're trying to figure out where they are and what you can do with them, you maybe don't need to go that far into any sort of woods. There are some traps available. So the nymph and adults, they do switch trees frequently, and when they do, they're climbing up the trunk. And oftentimes, even just during the day, at night, they'll go down the trunk, and in the morning, if you go early, they're all sort of sitting down on the trunk, and then as the day warms up, they'll come walking up the trunk. So these are two different traps that are sort of capitalizing on that behavior. One is sticky bands, and you can right now go to Home Depot. There is a brand of sticky band out there that is specifically marketed for spotted lanternfly, but it's really important to build a barrier and make sure it's tight to the trunk for wildlife protection. And I'm really, really sad to say that we had bands up this summer and for our monitoring project, and we did catch a woodpecker, which is not what we were trying to do. So this, if you're going to use a sticky band, you need to do this. And then there's another kind of trap called the circle trap. And what you're doing is you're taking a screen and sort of putting it all the way around the trunk of the tree, and then creating like a little tent. So they walk up and they kind of be funneled up into a little, it's like a lobster trap, except for tiny little, they would be very little lobsters, and they go up into this bag up here. And for these to work, you really have to pay attention to them. So they're better for a place that you're going to be fairly frequently. The ones that I have seen set by, agencies that are working on detecting SLF, if they don't come back to them all that often, then a lot of times these things kind of collapse and don't work so well. This next kind of trap I've found, this was developed by a colleague of mine up at USDA APHIS, Phil Lewis. He went to school with me, graduate school with me. It is brilliant. Chef's kiss. It catches, they love laying eggs in this trap. It's, we're not actually catching the eggs. We're creating a nice, safe place for these guys to lay their eggs, and the females just adore it. And as of yet, there's no commercial version of this available yet, mass produced, but you just use shingle material. They really like asphalt shingle, and you put a layer around the tree, then you put some foam to seal up the top, and then you put a larger piece of shingle with the rough side in around top, like a lampshade. And so this creates a little space for them to crawl up and lay their eggs. And they really like it. And it's a great way to detect the SLF before you have a noticeable level of adults. And it has the added bonus of not only being able to see them, but they really like laying their eggs in there. And so they'll lay them there instead of on a grapevine. And this is a picture of one of my coworkers doing a survey trying to look for eggs on vines in a vineyard. And vines in a vineyard are very complex surfaces, and it takes a lot of work to look at them carefully enough to find those egg masses. The egg masses, by the way, are about that big. They're actually quite large as far as egg masses go, but because they're so well camouflaged, it can be difficult to see, but they're very obvious on this egg trap. And you have them all in the same place, and you can squish them. So I think I'm getting to the end of what I need to say. Spotted lanternfly is currently considered a nuisance pest in residential or business landscapes. We don't have death of ornamental trees or shade trees being seen, and it's more of a plant stressor. So plant health decline, if you see plant health decline after SLF has been through, it may or may not have very much to do with the spotted lanternfly, because they're just in there sucking some sap, and especially the younger ones moving along. So, if you're thinking about making treatments, keep that movement pattern in mind, and also look at how many there are and the value of the plants that they're on. A lot of times this in a residential setting, it's not necessary in terms of saving the trees or saving the plants that they're on. And in a residential setting, you can use, or, in this type of setting, you can use, like the really non-lethal. If you wash them off, some of them will find their way back onto the tree, but some of them are going to take off and some will starve to death. So, there's a lot of different ways to address that. And because of their inconsistent movement through the landscape, even if you had one tree that was just nailed one year, that there was a lot of them, they might not be back the next year. So it might not make any sense to go in and treat that tree. I have some resources and we have lists about the various types of treatments that you can do at the ag station. But always make sure you follow a label if you're going to do any sort of pesticide work, which I don't think I need to tell this crowd, but I did want to show you a couple of resources. So as I say, we're at the ag station here, and the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station pops right up on Google, but you can look, and we have some fact sheets on our home page. There is a tab for spotted lanternfly right on that front page. And we do have some publications, PDFs that we have prepared. And this list here is all the different things that have been tested against spotted lanternfly and are also registered for use in Connecticut. But of course, always update that. And then the other place I wanted to shout out is Penn State. They were, as I said, the OG. They got SLF 11 years ago. So they've been working very hard and they have a lot of information, and I don't think there's enough. I mean, most of it's going to be applicable to us. There's also other university sites that are very useful and other government sites that are useful. So there's a lot of information out there. You've just sort of sat and listened to some of it digested, but I'm certainly not the only available source of information out there. But here at the Ag Station, just to give ourselves another little plug, if you're a Connecticut resident, we have what we call the Plant Disease Inquiry Office and the Insect Inquiry Office, and these are open from 8:30 to 4:30. Every day the state government is open, and we have expert scientists waiting for you to bring in your problem, either by phone or by walking in the door, and waiting and to identify your problem and to help you figure out how to solve it. With either plants or insects, and that's a free service for state residents. So just plug ourselves again. And of course, most of this material owes an awful lot to everybody who came before me, and I really appreciate them. And I think that's all I have to say. So I'm going to stop sharing and look and see if I can see any questions, and then I'll get out of your way.
So thank you, Dr. Rutledge. That was really good. And I'm just going to back up what she said about the ag station. If you're in Connecticut, we use it all the time. They do free soil testing. They're a great resource. Any questions I have, we call them. It's a great state free resource, and use them. They're experts. You got plant pathologists, great entomologists like Dr. Rutledge, Dr. Rich Cowles, a bunch of colleagues that I look up to. So thanks for all the work you guys do there. So I have a question. So in the organic world, our go-to insecticide is spinosad. And I've heard that the spotted lanternfly is pretty prone to most of the contact insecticides. Have you heard about spinosad being effective against them?
I could try to do a quick Google
Mhm.
answer that for you, but I think your quick Google is as good as mine. I don't really know a lot about the insecticides that people are using, and I mean, I don't know why it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we've anecdotally had people use it and say it works. I guess they're, they are
yeah,
pretty susceptible.
um,
Yeah.
they do on the Penn State site, they have tried a wide variety of insecticides and they have them ranked as to their effectiveness.
Mhm.
So that information I think is available. Just not from me.
Yeah. I think we'll have a couple extra minutes here, so I will look it up for everybody. Um, we have, again, anecdotally had clients use
Mhm.
it and it's been successful. You do have to get obviously the adult stage. Spinisad's not going to work against the eggs, so you do have to hit them, when
Yeah.
the adults are out. And the other thing is, with organics in general, they're not systemic, so they're not going to work like systemic imidacloprid at the sucking stage.
Right.
Yeah, you would have to use it as a surface, as a surface killer. Spinosad does kill on contact. A lot of it is it sticks to the leaves and biting insects. It's very effective at, but not sucking insects necessarily. But if you spray them directly, it should be effective. But there's also things,
Right.
yeah, there's things like neem oils, there's other things you could use, at that stage as well. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I'm just going to bounce back to the egg trap that I showed you. I mean, it's still, I think it was just, Phil first published this last year. It's still relatively new, but I've done it for 2 years now. And every egg trap I put out in an area with SLF, I get a ton of eggs there and not any on the trees right around it. So they're very attractive and they're a good way. Um, if you have adults in your yard 1 year and you put these traps up, it might help to make sure that you didn't have a repeat because you would get rid of the ones in the area. And those would go up. You want to get it up before egg laying, so sometime in September probably
There you
would
go.
be a good time for that.
Yeah. And Umar had a question. TOH resin, I'm not familiar with that, has been used as a very
Mm,
intense resin. Have you heard of that? I'm not sure. It's just
no,
different from
uh,
smell of live tree tissue. So
I hope so.
yeah. So does it help? Umar, I don't know. I'll try to look that up during the break as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, not
I
familiar
don't
with.
know. That's really interesting though. I mean,
Yeah.
Tree of Heaven has the sort of the stinky thing in it is a group of alkaloids called quasinoids, which Lake Quasi. I never have any trouble remembering the word quasinoid, but um, they're very bitter, and the bug itself, that bright coloring is because they bring that quasinoid into their body. It's like monarch
Mhm.
butterflies and cardinalides, and so I don't know. I mean, that might help produce more of the quasinoids. That might be what the fragrance is. I'm not sure. Anyway, very cool.
And yeah, he says it's why it's called Tree of Heaven because of the incense. So I didn't know that. Very interesting.
Oh, yeah, I just thought it was because it's pretty. I mean, it is
Yeah.
a pretty tree. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. It's too bad it's a target. So
yeah. I was very excited to hear on this meeting about the two potential Tree of Heaven biocontrols coming down the road, because if Tree of Heaven, if SLF didn't hit anything but Tree of Heaven, they'd be great.
yeah.
But
They
they
would
don't.
find another one. Yeah, I was at the Bridgeport train station and they were everywhere during
Hmm.
fall. Like it was unbelievable how many I saw around the train station. I don't know what it was there, but yeah, it's there. I haven't seen them in this part of the state. I'm in Brantford, so more east
Yeah.
of New Haven, but Westchester County and Fairfield County down that way, I see a lot of them. I haven't seen as many down here yet.
Well, so from what I know from our reported sightings, which I should also emphasize that if you see them, take a picture, upload it to the website with the sighting. That really helps us. And we're actually working on some risk modeling for the vineyards. And our rough risk model that we made this last summer, it was just distance from the last spotted SLF and distance from the gas station and for each of the vineyards. And it really fell into strong categories, and we put out traps to confirm it. So that sort of information is very helpful for us. But they have been cited in Brantford at the rest stop. And so they'll be spreading to the rest of it. I mean, I think, and there's quite a few in Clinton. For some reason, they seem to have maybe the Clinton crossings. It might be the outlet stores there that have really pulled them in, because there are a lot of people coming from a distance. We really haven't seen very much in, like Wyndham and Tolland. But train. If you look along train tracks, what do you see? Tree of Heaven. There's a lot of it. And they can ride the train and jump off wherever they want and find food. So the train tracks is another major corridor for this spread.
Yep, that's what I saw. Yeah, it's just a matter of time with this. It's what we've seen it spread in the last couple of years. If it's not up there in Wyndham County, it will be eventually.
It will be. I mean, it's the quiet corner, so it's not going to get there as quickly. The other really interesting thing, and as of yet, it feels like it's pretty anecdotal. So, but in Pennsylvania, they've had it for 10 years. And last summer, pretty universally, people are reporting that they saw less of the SLF, that there was a bit of a population collapse, and no idea of the mechanism yet. If I was going to hand wave, I'd say maybe they've managed to kill off enough of the Tree of Heaven to start impacting their population. But we don't know yet. But it seems like this is something maybe it will retreat. And of course, people are working on biocontrol not only for the trees, but for the bug, but that's still a work in process. So I don't know how soon it's going to come along. So in the meantime, it's just something that is big and stinky and creates a lot of honeydew and all honeydew's attendance problems. So unless you have a vineyard, it's really much more of a situation where it's a nuisance pest. Yeah. Not to say that nuisances aren't important, because they make it hard for us to enjoy our landscapes.
Yeah. And I think the outreach is working too, because a lot of people who are outside the industry know, oh, stink bug, they recognize them and they squash them. So, certainly, all the work you guys have done and reaching out to the press and the media has been helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think, they're very charismatic. I mean, there was an SNL sketch. Yeah. There was an SNL sketch with spotted lanternfly 2 years ago. Look it up. It's hysterical. But I mean, I can't think of any more height of fame for an insect pest than being featured on Saturday Night Live. So
I didn't know that. I will check that out. So
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
I mean, there were some inaccuracies in the sketch, but